Today, we have a discussion with Jim Sandman, and we are going to get to that in just a moment. But before I do that, I have a couple housekeeping items. First, my name is Christina Jackson. I'm the Executive Director of Washington Council of Lawyers. If you have not already introduced yourself, please put your name and organization in the chat so we know who is joining us. We are also going to get to, in just a couple of minutes, a sort of profile of leadership, and so be thinking about a good leader you have observed and maybe a weaker leader that you've observed, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. In addition, if you are not already a member of our community, you might want to look into joining Washington Council of Lawyers for programs like this, in which we are doing development, in particular professional development, but also in terms of community building. And so on that note, we have our fall kickoff, which is on September 21st, starting at 6:30 at Goodwin Proctor. Grab a friend, come visit, see what we're all about, find out how to join a committee, and talk to us about our work. One of the things that we do to support our community is our mentoring program. Applications are now open for mentees in the program. If you have 0 to 3 years of legal experience, you are welcome to apply. If you have more than 5 years of legal experience and you would like to share that with a mentee, please consider being a mentor, and you will find information about both the application and the mentor statement of interest on our website, and it will be in the chat in just a couple minutes. And then looking ahead a little bit farther, you can look for information about our upcoming litigation skill series programs, and of course, DC Pro Bono Week, which is at the end of October. And all of that will be on our website. Now let me turn our discussion to what we're talking about today, which is leadership in the law. Our distinguished lecturer for today is Jim Sandman. And he teaches a class in law and leadership at the University of Pennsylvania, Carey School of Law. In addition, he is a senior consultant to the Future of the Profession initiative. And for those of you who know, Jim has been on the forefront of thinking about and helping us get to bridging that access to justice gap. And now he's doing some in-depth work on the future of the profession. Prior to joining Penn Law, he was the president of the Legal Services Corporation, and we are honored to have him on our honorary board. And with that, I'm going to turn that over to Jim for our discussion.
Thanks very much, Christina. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming to the webinar. As Christina mentioned, I teach a course at the University of Pennsylvania Law School called Leadership in Law. It's a one-semester course. It meets once a week for an hour and 50 minutes. We've got until 1 o'clock, so I have to speak fast and pack it in. This is intended to be kind of a teaser for you about what learning leadership looks like. And I'd be happy to do more after this webinar. I'd be happy to talk to all of you individually at the end of the webinar. I'll put my contact information in the chat, and would welcome the opportunity to follow up with you. Don't ever worry about bothering me. I love to be helpful to people if I can in any way. So I'd like to start with a PowerPoint. And here are the 5 subjects that I'd like to cover in the roughly hour that we have together. I'd like to say a few words about why studying leadership is a worthwhile thing for lawyers. Second, I'd like to talk briefly about whether leadership can be learned. You'll sometimes hear people say that leadership is innate. Either you have it or you don't. It's not something that can be taught, not something that can be learned. Here's a spoiler alert. I wouldn't be teaching a course called Leadership in Law or doing this webinar today if I thought that leadership couldn't be learned. Next, I'd like to talk about qualities of effective leaders. What is it that makes a particular person a strong leader in an organization? What are the qualities that make a person who may be in a leadership position an ineffective leader? I'd then like to move to a discussion of leadership styles. This is the how of different types of leaders get things done. And finally, I'd like to offer some advice on how you might develop your own leadership skills. Why study leadership? Lawyers become leaders in a wide variety of organizations, not just law firms and corporate legal departments, not just as chairs and managing partners and general counsels, but you'll see them as CEOs of major corporations. You'll see them in top academic positions. The new president of the University of Pennsylvania is a lawyer, Liz McGill. She was previously dean of the Stanford Law School. You'll see them across all kinds of nonprofit organizations, not just law-related ones. And you see them in government in very senior positions, from president. The most common occupation for presidents has been lawyer, but you'll also see them as cabinet secretaries and as heads of various agencies and subparts of departments throughout the government. So lawyers tend to become leaders. You'll also see that people want leaders on their boards. Many organizations that may not be legal organizations value the perspective of a lawyer and the thinking of a lawyer on their governance bodies. And you, if you haven't already, are likely to have a number of opportunities over the course of your careers to serve on boards. Notwithstanding the fact that lawyers end up as leaders in such a wide array of organizations, the legal profession provides very little formal training for leaders to become lawyers. I contrast this with the corporate world, which often has leadership tracks, does a lot in professional development, takes a long-term view about what it takes to become a leader and doesn't leave it to chance. The military spends a lot of time on this. Anyone among you who has had military service will appreciate the attention that's devoted to leadership development in the military. But as a general matter, there's nothing equivalent in law, with the result that lawyers who end up in leadership positions kind of have to learn it on the fly. And you get the predictable results. Sometimes it's kind of ugly. Sometimes it works out, but there's a randomness about it that I think we need to do something to minimize. And finally, why study leadership? Every lawyer I know, every law student I know became a lawyer, is a lawyer, because in one way or another, they wanted to make a difference. They wanted a meaningful career. They wanted to do something significant. And you're more likely to be able to make a difference and to have impact if you're in a leadership position of some kind, and if you can do it well. So this is all about trying to help you realize those ambitions you had when you made the decision, whenever you made it, to become a lawyer. Can leadership be learned? I want to do a little exercise here to make a point. And I want to ask each of you to think about, well, let's just, because in the interest of time, just think about one good leader, one strong leader that you've experienced or that you've observed. It can be anybody. It can be a boss. It can be a coach you had. It can be a public figure that you've watched. And I want you to think about what it is that you think has made them a good leader. What qualities about them has made them a good leader? So let's start with that. And I want you to put your responses in the chat. Just the words that come to you, and you don't need to identify the leader. You don't need to out anybody. No need to name names. I'm just looking for a list of qualities. Great list. Keep going. I love these. Keep them coming. These are really wonderful. So I'm just going to quickly read through them. You're going to see some commonalities, and you may see some things that you agree with but didn't think to list. There's so many of them, I have to scroll up pretty far. Good listener, accountability, inspiring, clarity, good management and organizational skills, transparency, visionary, an empathetic, good listener, integrity. They listen to the people under them and seem to actually care about their ideas. Accountability and encouragement, empathy, ability to clearly articulate reasons for decisions, adjust to the needs of each person rather than each person needing to adjust to the leader, clarity in communication, cared about her staff, listens and then makes a call, good communication skills, patience, great presentation, good public speaker, inclusive of everyone in the office or environment, vision, focused, strong organizational skills, honest, knows how to read an audience, ability to receive constructive feedback, strong people skills, open to new ideas and solving problems, honesty and empathy, can communicate well with a variety of people from all backgrounds, communication, knowledge, flexibility, apologizes and follows up with changed behavior, strong organizational skills, involves everyone in the organization, no one left behind, willing to experiment with new ways of doing things, understands there's more than one way to do a task, humility, willing to take risks, great problem solver, honest about their shortcomings, courage, remembers what it was like to be led, kind, curious, has a growth mindset, strong personality, vision, creativity, critical thinking, great conflict resolution skills. A bad leader likes conflicts, looks at things from different perspectives, resilient, listens to all perspectives, then makes decisions based on a combination of factors such as morals, good people skills, resilience, courage, accountability for decisions, conflict avoidant. So notice something about these. A lot of these qualities that you're talking about, I describe as personal qualities. They have to do with the character of the individual, but it's more than that. A lot of it involves a consciousness of what it means to be a leader. I'm going to try to capture these all in a slide that I have coming up that will include many, but not all of these things. Now I'd like you to do the reverse. Think about a bad leader that you've experienced. You don't need to name them, no need to name names. We're not shaming people. What qualities about them made them an ineffective leader? Bully, lack of direction, micromanager, indecisive, did not address problems, closed-minded, too much in the weeds, avoids conflict, inconsiderate to other people's time and capacity, talks off the cuff without thinking about impact on the listener, unable to manage assignments or time, closed-mindedness, micromanager, oblivious to others, inability to give or receive feedback, doesn't respect other people's ideas. Unconstructive feedback, just says what needs to be done without providing leadership on how it can be done. Doesn't know how to delegate, took frustrations out on underlings, unclear instructions, yelled, micromanaged, cultural incompetencies, lack of empathy, cannot communicate well, unwillingness to change or improve. A lot of these are the flip side of the virtues that you identified among strong leaders. I asked you to do this for a couple of reasons. One, it appears that none of you had any problem in identifying someone that you thought of as a good leader and describing them. And the reverse, you didn't have any problem identifying a bad leader you've experienced and describing what made them ineffective. That to me is an illustration of the fact that leadership can be learned. One of the ways you learn leadership is by watching very intentionally and mindfully and look broadly, not just at people at the very top of organizations who have fancy titles, but anybody who's in a leadership role, somebody who's running a meeting that you're in, somebody who has a leadership position on a project that you're doing with a voluntary organization that you're involved in. Watch and see how they do what they do. And if you think they're good at what they do, think about how it is that they're so effective, what they're doing and how they're doing it that makes them effective. And the converse for bad leaders. If you are deliberate about it, if you make it a part of your own personal education to be reflective about this, you'll end up with a pretty good education in at least what you regard as the qualities of leadership. Second, I want to emphasize the commonality of your responses. Some of you use different words to describe the same phenomena, but there was a lot of consistency across your responses, which suggests to me that there is a sort of a general understanding about what makes for good leadership and for bad, which leads me to the conclusion that yes, leadership can be learned. So let me go back to my PowerPoint. Now, here are some of the qualities of effective leaders that I've identified that reflect what I heard from you and that reflect what I've heard from students in the course that I teach. Many of these come from the textbook that I use for my course. It's called Leadership for Lawyers. It was written by Professor Deborah Rohde of Stanford Law School. Deborah died last year in January. Terrible loss for our profession. Deborah was a friend of mine, and she was extraordinarily generous to me as I was getting started in teaching. She shared not only her book with me, but all of her teaching materials, everything, her class notes, her PowerPoints, her syllabus, and said, use them as if they're your own, a gesture of remarkable generosity. I've got 2 slides here with characteristics. The ones in bold on the left here are the ones that I think are the most important for an effective leader. Vision, many of you mentioned that. In one way or another, you got to know where you're going. You have to know what you're trying to accomplish. This is the difference between leadership and management. You have to have a big picture view of what the entity that you're leading should be trying to accomplish. Next, I put self-awareness. The literature on leadership suggests that self-awareness is the single most important quality of a leader. Knowing objectively, honestly, what you're good at and what you're not, having a sense of how you come across to people. This is something that some people in positions of leadership don't have, and you see the consequences of it. Integrity and honesty. I don't mean to suggest that only people with integrity and honesty become leaders. That's not true. But I think that the leader of integrity, someone whose word is reliable, have a special advantage. People trust them. They're more inclined to follow them because they don't think that they're pursuing some personal agenda. Leadership is not about their own self-aggrandizement. They have an interest in the good of the organization. Integrity and honesty, I think, also involves an ability and self-awareness that these qualities altogether reflect this quality of being able to recognize mistakes, apologize for them when you make them, that some of you mentioned. Next is humility. This is related to self-awareness. It's knowing that some people are going to be better at things that you are, that you don't know everything. and it can help you and assemble a team of people who can compensate for your weaknesses and promote your strengths. Empathy. Many of you mentioned that in one way or another. And finally, good judgment, which nobody mentioned, but which I think is, and I don't read that in the literature. I added this to the list. But I think good judgment is really important. Good judgment is hard to teach and hard to learn. It involves a combination of common sense, self-awareness, perceptiveness, an ability to predict human behavior and foresee consequences, an appreciation for appearances, how things look, an understanding of how to do something and not just what to do, a sense of balance and perspective, and a very clear understanding of right and wrong. Some people, very few, are born with good judgment. Most develop it by making mistakes and learning from them, and by observing people who have good judgment and trying to emulate them. The other qualities, I don't mean to suggest aren't really, really important. They are. Intelligence, you have to have charisma and magnetism. Some of you kind of alluded to that, although I don't know that anybody used the term. Competence, clearly. Self-confidence, you need to convey a sense that you know what you're doing. People have to believe in you. Enthusiasm and energy. The lethargic leader is going to run into some problems persuading people that they are the appropriate person to be at the top of an organization. Self-control and emotional maturity. I don't know that any of you use those terms, but particularly in describing bad behavior, a number of you were describing the opposite of that. Good relationship manager, good communicator, passion, that is commitment to the mission of the organization. Culture builder is something that I added. The culture of an organization has a lot to do with whether the organization is able to realize the potential of the individuals in it. Do people feel good about the place where they work? Do they think that this is a place where they can really flourish? Or do they feel like they have to put on a suit of armor every day because the workplace culture is just so unpleasant, even toxic? Decisiveness, you can't be indecisive and be a leader. That can be paralyzing. Persuasiveness, self-sacrifice, and a service ethic. People respect the leader who doesn't put themselves first, who puts the organization first. Commitment, ability to inspire, teaches others to be leaders, helps develop people. Forward-looking, resilience. And the last one is one that I just added this weekend, based on an event I went to where I was watching people. And I think curiosity is a really important quality in a leader. Interest in things that you don't know about, a willingness to learn about them. Have you ever worked with somebody who isn't curious? They tend to have tunnel vision. They stay in their lane. They have sort of a not my job philosophy that limits their effectiveness. It can limit their interest in what you do because they don't care about it. And that can be demoralizing for you. So these are some of the qualities that I think are really important in leadership. I'm going to share my slides with everybody who's participating today, assuming that we have email addresses for all of you, so you don't need to take notes. You'll have these available. One great book that I have a lot of respect for that talks about qualities of effective leadership is a pretty old book now. It's called Good to Great. It was written by Jim Collins and came out 21 years ago. What Collins did was he did a study of organizations that he regarded as having made a move from good to great. He identified companies that had, as he put it, sustained greatness for at least 15 years. Now, this was the corporate world, the for-profit world. His measure was financial performance, and he looked at stock returns that had exceeded the market by at least 3 times every year consistently over 15 years. And he identified 11 companies that had done that. And he asked, did the 11 companies that met his standard for good to great transformation share things in common that distinguish them from comparator companies, companies in the same industries facing the same market conditions that didn't do nearly as well? And one of the differences that he found that was consistent among the 11 companies that he characterized as great and that distinguished them from the comparator companies was leadership, leadership at the top, what he called level 5 leadership. He identifies 5 levels of leadership, starting with just being the person who does your job. This is sort of a guide for how to become a leader. Because the best leaders are people who were good at being led. And often it's hard to rise to the top of an organization if you didn't do a good job in the levels below. So level 1 is not a leadership position. It's on the path to leadership. It's what he describes as the highly competent individual who makes productive contributions to the organization in a variety of ways. Level 2 is the contributing team member, who has the ability not just to do a good job alone, functioning in isolation, but can achieve group objectives and works well with others. The next step is beginning to get to leadership. It's manager, competent manager, organizes people and resources toward the effective and efficient pursuit of objectives. Next is leader. Has a clear and compelling vision, stimulates higher performance standards. And then there's level 5. This was the level that really distinguished these 11 companies that he described as great. And he said that a level 5 executive builds an enduring greatness through a paradoxical blend of personal humility and professional will. In the book, he explains this a little more. He says that in looking at the leadership of his 11 great companies, we were surprised, shocked really, to discover the type of leadership required for turning a good company into a great one. Compared to high-profile leaders with big personalities who made headlines and became celebrities, the good to great leaders seem to have come from Mars. Self-effacing, quiet, reserved, even shy. These leaders are a paradoxical blend of personal humility and professional will. They are more like Lincoln and Socrates than Patton or Caesar. Isn't that fascinating? Humility, self-effacing, quiet, reserved, even shy. Introverts can be among the best leaders. In the course that I teach, I invite in guest speakers, people that are role models for me, people that I admire and that I think model the kind of leadership I really want my students to aspire to. There are also people who are good about talking about leadership, and those can be two different things. Some people are really good leaders in doing it, not so good in talking about it. And my students are always struck. They're struck by two things. Number one, how women dominate my guest speakers because they meet my standards more easily, I think, than men do. And second, that a number of them identify themselves as introverts. One of my speakers is Martha Minow of Harvard Law School. And Martha is the immediate past dean of Harvard Law School. She was dean for 8 years from 2009 to 2017. She succeeded Elena Kagan as dean of the law school. Martha had to be asked 3 times to be dean of the Harvard Law School. She didn't want the job. She loves teaching. She loves scholarship. She loves writing. The idea of spending her time fundraising and schmoozing with alumni and leading law faculty wasn't something that she really wanted to do, but they thought she'd be great at it. Martha describes herself as an introvert, and she says that her experience in leadership, leading a very public life, required that she make time for herself. That if she had a full day of meetings and speeches and meets and greets, that she needed to have some quiet time in the afternoon to herself, maybe to take a nap, to read something, to zone out, just to refresh herself, because it's stressful for her to have to play the role of extrovert, which is what the job of a law school dean often requires. She had a self-awareness about who she was and about challenges that she might face because of her introversion in the role that she was asked to play. But I saw her do her job, and she was enormously successful. If you're an introvert and you wonder about your capacity to lead, I recommend a TED Talk and a book. There's a lawyer named Susan Cain, C-A-I-N, who has a TED Talk. It's one of the most popular TED Talks of all time about introversion. And she wrote a book called Quiet. And it's about the power of introverts and the influence that they can have. So one of my points is to, as I hope that list that I just showed emphasizes, leadership, good leadership comes in different shapes and sizes. Don't stereotype what you think a good leader looks like. Different people can do leadership really effective in a way that's comfortable for them and works for them. And if you're trying to pretend to be something that you're not, and you're playing on a pretty big stage where a lot of people are going to be observing you over a long period of time, you're faking it is going to come across as insincerity and is going to impede your effectiveness. So knowing who you are is really important. So I would like to move on and talk about leadership styles. This is different from the qualities that make for a good leader. This is how the leader goes about doing his or her work. And this list comes from the textbook that I use, which looks, you can't, I got my background blurred so you can't see it. Let me take the blur off so you can see what no, too hard to do while I'm in PowerPoint. I have the citation to this book at the end of the slideshow. It's a textbook, so it doesn't make for the best bedside reading, but it's a really good book and I recommend it. So these are the qualities of leadership that Professor Rohde identifies in her book. This is taken from a lot of literature. It's a sort of an aggregation of observations about leadership styles that she took from a variety of research reports on styles of effective leaders. Let me give you a brief summary of what each of these terms means, and I want you to think about leaders that you've experienced who exhibit these styles of leadership. The first is coercive. These are the bullies. These are the people who demand immediate compliance. These are the my way or the highway leaders. She writes that this is the style often associated with positions of power. Often people, they jump to this as thinking, oh, this is what leadership is about. But it is regarded as typically the least effective style of leadership, which doesn't surprise me at all. These are the top-down leaders who kill new ideas, totally unresponsive to suggestions from the people that they're leading. They don't convey a sense of shared mission. It's all about them. A second style of leadership is authoritative, which may sound akin to coercive, but it's really quite different. It combines, as she says, a clarity about ends, the goals you're trying to reach, with flexibility about means. So the leader describes the goal, but empowers other people to choose the means to achieve those goals. So there is a sense of participation, but not a sense of drift. They've set the direction, but then involve others in getting to where they're trying to go. Let me give you an example of this. One of the speakers that I have for my course is Jonathan Lippman, who was the Chief Judge of New York and of the New York Court of Appeals, the highest court in New York State, for a number of years. He was an incredibly dynamic leader. Leadership in the judiciary is hard because you have to lead equals. Your ability as a chief judge to influence the decision of your fellow judges is limited by the autonomy that they have. He was absolutely committed to improving access to justice in New York State. And over the course of his 7 years as chief judge, he increased the state appropriation for legal aid annually from less than $11 million to $100 million. That happened because of one person, Jonathan Lippman. That's leadership. Among the other things he did was to institute the requirement that many of you may be familiar with, that as a condition of admission to the New York State Bar, every applicant have to have done at least 50 hours of pro bono work. This was very controversial when he first floated the idea, but he thought it was really important for two reasons. One, he recognized the magnitude of the justice gap in New York State, the difference between the civil legal needs of low-income people and the resources available to meet those needs. And he hoped to marshal the resources of law students to do something to provide help to people who otherwise were getting none. But second, he thought that it was a really important part of a lawyer's preparation for being a lawyer to know something about the reality of the justice system today and its complete and utter failure for people who can't afford a lawyer. He hoped to plant a seed at the very beginning of their careers that later might blossom into a commitment to doing something about it in some way over the long term, and not just for those 50 hours to get admitted to the bar. It was an important part of legal education, and he thought creating a culture over the long term of pro bono in the state whose judiciary he headed. So the bar was all up in arms when he came out with this. They thought this was the camel's nose under the tent, that he was going to be moving pretty quickly to mandatory pro bono work for all lawyers in the state, which no state has a mandatory pro bono requirement. But what he did is he announced his goal, but then he left the implementation of it, how it would be achieved, exactly to whom it would be applied, what would count as pro bono work. He gave a fair amount of flexibility to other people to have input into those decisions. He didn't decree chapter and verse of all the details. He didn't micromanage the implementation, and that helped to get buy-in. It helped so that by the time the requirement actually became effective, there was a lot more support for it than when he had proposed it initially. That is authoritative leadership. Affiliative leadership is about putting people first. Affiliative leaders focus on maintaining satisfaction and harmony among followers. They tend to be natural relationship builders. They're great at things like positive feedback. They celebrate group accomplishments. And there can be a high level of trust and loyalty and innovation in the organizations that they head. The risk of an affiliative style of leadership is that it can lead to an environment where the leader is trying to keep everybody happy. Problems go unaddressed. Poor performance can go unaddressed, and that can be demoralizing for people who are good performers to see colleagues who are phoning it in and nothing happens. So it can result in conflict avoidance, I guess is the way I'd put it. And sometimes a leader needs to address issues, but this can be a very effective style of leadership. Democratic is very inclusive. It's allowing a lot of participation in decision-making about the organization. Stakeholders have a say in decisions that affect them. The text says many heads of public interest legal organizations employ this approach and rely heavily on staff to shape organizational priorities. But Professor Rohde goes on to point out that this has its drawbacks. It can result in paralysis and a lack of decision-making, endless meetings where ideas are mulled over, consensus remains elusive, and the only visible result is more meetings. I'm sure some of you have experienced that. The intentions are very good, but it can inhibit the ability of an organization to move and to get things done. And it can be a particular problem in an organization, say, facing a crisis or trying to solve huge problems with some sense of urgency. Next is pace setting. This is the leader who is all about high standards. We have high standards here, and often models those standards herself or himself. I don't ask anybody to do anything that I'm not willing to do. I work 24/7. I fired my family a few years ago, and I don't take vacations, and I respond to my emails at 2:30 a.m. in the morning, and you should too. And that can work in an organization where people are very self-motivated, where they share that attitude, where people need little direction or coordination. Most organizations don't fit that description. So this can end up backfiring. It becomes all about the leader. It's different from the coercive style of leadership, but it's a glorification of high standards. High standards clearly have a place, but this can elevate them to a point where it becomes counterproductive. And finally is the coaching style. This is a very, very collaborative and personal style of leadership. They help employees identify their strengths and their weaknesses. They work to build their strengths and to mitigate their weaknesses. They're aware of their employees' career aspirations and try to lead them in a way that allows the realization of those aspirations. But this too, this is described as the least common leadership approach. And the explanation is that leaders often don't have the time in a high pressure economy for the slow and tedious work of teaching people and helping them grow. My observation is that the coaching style of leadership works in small organizations or in small cohorts. Much harder to do in a large organization or to do for the leader who is leading large numbers of people because it is so labor intensive. But I think there is a way to provide coaching leadership from a level other than the very top. And if people in management positions who are dealing with smaller groups of people are empowered by the person at the top to adopt this approach, if they're encouraged to adopt this approach, I think you can end up with the best of both worlds, where you have a nimble, agile, decisive leadership structure at the top, supported by people at other levels in the organization who feel like their manager is looking out for them, cares about them, and is trying to help them maximize their potential in the organization. So think about the people that you identified when we went through the earlier exercise, the people who are strong leaders, and think about which of these categories of style you might have seen them implement. But I want to emphasize something. the study of leadership runs the risk that you try to put everything in a box, that you adopt one-size-fits-all characterizations of leadership. The best leaders use a combination of these styles, maybe not the coercive one ever, but they mix and match. They engage in what's called situational leadership. They're not frauds. They just recognize that different circumstances require different styles of leadership. That's part of self-awareness. It's part of perceptiveness. It's looking at the situation and recognizing that maybe I shouldn't handle this situation in exactly the same way I handled a very different situation with very different people yesterday. So what the right style to adopt in any particular circumstance is, I think, depends on a variety of things. It can depend in the most general level on the nature of the organization. Is it big or small? Is it a startup? Is it brand new, or has it been around for 100 years? Is it thriving? Are things going really well? Have you got a great team of people already assembled? Are you winning every award in your field that you can? Are you struggling? Are there financial problems? Are you not performing well? Are you losing out to competitors if you're in a competitor environment? Is it for profit or not for profit? To what extent are you able to use money to motivate people or not? If you're in a nonprofit and money is very tight, as it is for most nonprofits, what other tools do you have to incentivize people, to motivate them, to create a sense of shared purpose? Is it a government entity? The issues there can be really wild. You know, most presidential appointees in the federal government serve less than 2 years in their positions. And they come in at the top of an organization with often a very well-established staff underneath them, and leading when you're new in an organization at the top, likely have a limited period of time, and are dealing with people who are already very competent and have been doing their jobs successfully for a long time, is a different kind of animal. Is it a volunteer organization that you're talking about? Is this a nonprofit that you're working with? Are you on the board of the Washington Council of Lawyers, for example? Are you trying to motivate other volunteers where it's only by their good will that you're able to get things done? Or do you have paid staff whose day job it is to serve the ends of the organization? Even within the same organization, you can sometimes need to take different approaches with different departments within the organization. In a law firm, for example, any of you in law firms, different practice groups have very different cultures and challenges. And the managing partner or the firm chair who tries to adopt a one-size-fits-all approach in dealing with all of them, I think is going to get into trouble. Even within a department of an organization, differences among the employees can require that you handle different situations differently. And then there are just the immediate circumstances that you find yourself in dealing with a particular problem or challenge or goal. Are you dealing with a crisis, or is it business as usual? If you're in a crisis, you usually have to act quickly and decisively, and you may not have the time for the type of democratic consultation and coaching that you would ordinarily do in a different environment. What happens if there was just an adverse decision against your client in a major case, and you get a call from the media, and you need to put together a response really quickly, and you're the leader of the team that needs to respond? Those circumstances require a particular style of leadership to deal with the urgency of the situation. External considerations, outside stakeholders may have a very different perspective on a problem or a situation than your internal employees do, and you need to be sensitive to that. And the need to be responsive to them can affect which style of leadership you adopt. So let me give you a few examples from my own experience of very different experiences that I felt required different styles of leadership. Um, I spent 30 years at Arnold and Porter. I spent 10 years as managing partner of the firm. Most of my career was in the big law firm world. 15 years ago, I decided to make a career change and took up a new second career in public service and public interest work. But the bulk of my career so far has been in a big law firm. My ultimate goal is to get to 50-50, where I will have spent half my career in the for-profit sector and half in public service and public interest work. So I opened the Los Angeles office of Arnold and Porter. I was asked to go out there and to be the managing partner of a new office of the firm. The people in this office came from different places. Some moved from other offices of Arnold and Porter, but the majority of the people came from other law firms to join this new office. We had 14 lawyers, a total staff of 20 on the day we opened, and it felt like a startup to me. I thought that there was an enormous opportunity there because of the vote of confidence that the people had given to this enterprise in making the decision to leave something else behind to join this brand new office. Every person in that office had given up prior employment to take a chance on this new enterprise. And I thought, I owe them something. They've given a vote of confidence to us. We need to make them think, yeah, that was a good decision. If you can harness the energy and enthusiasm of people who are new to an organization, who've come to join you because they think that they're going to find with you something better than whatever it was they left behind, it can be magic. So I thought in that environment that it was very important to be inclusive and democratic, to listen to people, to give them a say. And I guess I never would have used the terminology. I would have been totally unfamiliar with it at the time. But I think I used a combination of affiliative and democratic and coaching leadership, but also some authoritative. We weren't a standalone enterprise. We were part of an existing law firm, and the leadership of the firm as a whole had clear expectations about what we were going to do. But that environment, I thought, would have made it completely inappropriate for a more top-down style of leadership. I think that it gave people a sense of reward to have an opportunity to participate in this new enterprise that they had decided to become a part of. I knew everyone in the office. I knew their families. I knew the role that everybody played. There was an intimacy about the relationship because of the small size. After I came back to Washington, after that experience, 3 years later, I became managing partner of the whole firm, which at the time was about 1,600 people and multiple offices. And that was a wildly different experience. The approach that I'd taken in opening a new office in Los Angeles simply wasn't going to work as a matter of scale across a multi-office organization employing so many people. I did, nevertheless, work my heart out to try to get to know every single person in the organization. You can do that if it's a priority of yours, because I had felt the impact it has when someone in a position of authority knows your name. This was a lesson I learned when I was a second-year associate at Arnold and Porter. And the leader of the firm was a man named Bud Veith. Marcia Tucker, who's on this webinar, will remember Bud. One day when I was a second-year associate, I arrived in the parking garage at the same time as the managing partner of the firm, Bud. We came up in the elevator together, and as we rode, two things became apparent to me. The first was that Bud couldn't remember my name. And the second was that it bothered the heck out of him. I could see the wheels turning as he was trying to remind himself of my name, and it wouldn't come to him. I wasn't offended that he didn't remember my name. I was a second-year associate in a big firm. He had a lot of names to remember. I just thought it was sweet that it bothered him. He went off to his office. I went off to mine. 5 minutes after I got to my office, my phone rings. I answer it. The voice on the other end says, "Jim, this is Bud. I was wondering if you'd be free for lunch today." It's very clear to me what had happened. He'd gone to his secretary, Linda Edwards, and he'd said to Linda, Linda, who is that kid? Looks to be about 15, but he's a lawyer, started with us about a year ago. And Linda said, that would be Jim Sandman, Bud. And Bud called me up and invited me to lunch. He took the time to learn my name. You know, it was his way of apologizing to me that he couldn't remember my name on the elevator. He made me feel like $1,000,000 that day. I have never forgotten that and never will. So there are things you can do in even a larger organization to personalize things. But I had 242 partners, each of whom had pretty strong views on how things that were to be done. And I needed to adopt a style of leadership more toward the authoritative and less toward the affiliative democratic end of the spectrum. Although where I could, I tried to mix it up. And as I said previously, I did different things in different circumstances. And then finally, most recently, I headed the Legal Services Corporation, which is the country's largest funder of civil legal aid programs. Its legal status is as an independent nonprofit corporation, but it was established by an act of Congress. Its board of directors is appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. The Legal Services Corporation gets all of its money from an annual congressional appropriation. It's subject to the Freedom of Information Act and the Government in the Sunshine Act. In many, many ways, it looks like a government agency. When I came in there, I had a charge from the board to do a lot of things and to do them quickly. But because of the political nature of the organization, a board appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate, I couldn't assume that I had any more than 3 years to do what the board was asking me to do. I came in 2011. It wasn't at all clear that President Obama was going to be reelected in 2012. If he had been defeated, a new board would have been appointed. The custom was that a new board brings in a new president. So I didn't have the luxury I didn't feel that I had the luxury of unending internal consulting and consensus building before I had to make some decisions and do something. It was an inherent limitation on my tenure, a lack of clarity about how much time I might have that required that I act quickly and differently from how I might have if I thought this was where I was going to be for the rest of my career. So let me wrap it up. I want to just give you a few tips on how you might develop your own leadership skills. First, where I started, observe leaders. Be intentional about it. Study what makes them effective or ineffective. Second, you can learn leadership through volunteer activities, not just in your day job. My hobby is being a volunteer. I'm involved in a lot of organizations, and many of the best leadership lessons I've learned in contexts completely unrelated to the law, completely unrelated to my job. I currently chair the board of my church, which is like really different from other leadership positions, and I learn stuff there. I'm always trying to learn more, and that very different context has given me new perspectives on leadership. Pursue volunteer activities that will give you an opportunity to develop your leadership skills. You don't have to be piggish about it and be gunning for the chair of the board from the outset. You'll likely actually move up in leadership if you're a good teammate first. If you volunteer to do things, you say yes to assignments, you help out with the organization. But there's an opportunity there to grow your leadership skills in a way that will benefit you across your life and your career, including in your day job. And then finally, I've cited some reading that I recommend, the book Good to Great. I'm really just talking about, I think I wrote chapter 2. I think it's chapter 2 rather than chapter 5. Leadership for Lawyers, which is the text I use. And then a book by Adam Grant, who's a professor at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, called Give and Take, which is a very positive book. And his conclusion is that what he calls givers, people who are generous and kind and thoughtful, make better leaders than people who are not. So if you're looking for affirmation that good people can finish first, and that whoever it was who said nice guys finish last was a cynic, a loser, and wrong, this is your book. So I'd like to wrap up there. I'm happy to respond to questions and make you an offer. I started my career at the elbow of a role model of leadership, the judge for whom I clerked immediately after I graduated from law school, Judge Max Rosen of the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit. Judge Rosen was my first and most important mentor and role model as a lawyer. I don't know that there's a day that I don't think about him. And there are only two other people no longer with us about whom I can say that, my parents. He had a remarkable influence on me. And if I can be to just one other person what Judge Rosen was to me, I will have done something good with my life. So I'll make you a standing offer to be available to you, to talk to you, have any interest in this subject, if I can be helpful to you, follow up, and you will hear back from me. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim, for that incredible presentation. I have done some answering of some basic questions. We have one that maybe we can just take a minute or two to expand upon, and that is how a shy leader can be a good or effective leader.
I think it's because it's not about them. I think it's because they're not likely to be boastful and an egomaniac. It may be a reflection of humility, and that can get reflected in a number of other ways. An ability to listen, to learn from others, to be open-minded. I don't know it all. Having said that, I mean, I'm an introvert, and I describe myself as masquerading as an extrovert. I've had a series of jobs where I've had to be public and speak to very large groups of people and talk to people at cocktail parties, which is, my wife is an introvert too. Our idea of a good party is one where we can stand in the corner and talk to each other. But I know how to do those things, and I can. So they needn't be inconsistent, but I think that's what they were getting at, what Collins was getting at in Good to Great when he said, shy. That not the gangbuster, charismatic, bigger than life personality. There's room for the person who's humble.
Absolutely.